Ladies and gentlemen, as the event is about to begin, may I request for you to please kindly switch your mobile phones and all other electronic devices to the silent mode if you have not already done so. Thank you. Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, 2005 Nobel Laureate for Peace, International Peace Foundation Chairman, Mr. Uwe Morawetz, and US President, Professor Tan Chor Chuan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and a very warm welcome to the National University of Singapore. My name is Eugene. I'm a final year student at the Faculty of Engineering at NUS Business School.
And I am Lishani, a first-year student at Yale NUS College. Together, we will be your Masters of Ceremonies for this very special program. To begin, may we please invite Professor Tan Chor Chuan, NUS President, to give his welcome address. Professor Tan, please.
Good evening, Mr. Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, the 2005 Nobel Laureate for Peace, the Chairman of the International Peace Foundation, Mr. Uwe Morawetz, Professor Pericles Lewis, the President of Yale NUS College, distinguished guests, students, fellow faculty, and friends. Well, a very warm welcome to the 5th ASEAN Bridges Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace series. Tonight we are deeply honored to have with us our illustrious keynote speaker, the 2005 Nobel Laureate for Peace, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei. The 5th ASEAN Bridges series follows earlier sessions held in prior years in Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam. The series has been made possible by the strong support of the International Peace Foundation. Through the joint patronage of the Foundation's 21 Nobel laureates and the support and participation of luminaries globally and within the region, the International Peace Foundation has made laudable strides in promoting peace through greater understanding and dialogue. We are very appreciative of the Foundation's commitment and that of its patrons to work with educational institutions, particularly in exploring multidisciplinary research and its application to develop comprehensive and sustainable solutions for community and global challenges. Since 1999, the Foundation has organized over 1,000 events and programs worldwide in its efforts to promote interdisciplinary and multicultural dialogue and engagement. Their commitment has always been to build and to expand positive networks of change and advancement. This spirit of fostering richer and more diverse exchange and sharing eventually inspired the Foundation to initiate the ASEAN Bridges series in 2003 as a counterpart to the peace summits in Europe. The Foundation's Nobel laureates, together with its distinguished supporters, as well as the support of other leading thinkers, have made accessible a rich collective of wisdom, knowledge, and expertise. NUS and the Yale NUS College are proud to be hosts for the Singapore leg of this series, which featured a fascinating earlier address by the 2011 Nobel Laureate for Physics, Professor Brian Schmidt. As a global university with a uniquely Asian focus, NUS is happy and excited to collaborate closely with the Foundation in its outreach, education, and research initiatives, and explore opportunities that will deepen and increase the impact of NUS's programs and efforts. This evening, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, the 2005 Nobel Laureate for Peace. In his award, the Nobel Committee had cited Dr. ElBaradei's unflagging efforts and leadership of the International Atomic Energy Agency in eliminating the threat of nuclear proliferation and promoting the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. In his Nobel lecture, Dr. ElBaradei spoke eloquently of the need to promote the security of the human family and the urgency of addressing global conditions of inequality and poverty that lead so often to instability and suffering. Dr. ElBaradei's address this evening will center on a topic of growing significance and concern for countries around the world, the issue of global equity and security. Like me, I'm sure that you too are looking forward to hearing Dr. ElBaradei's insights and thoughts on this subject. So thanks very much once again for sharing this evening with us, and I hope you'll have a very stimulating and enjoyable evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tan. We are pleased to now invite Mr. Uwe Morawetz, Chairman of the International Peace Foundation, to share his thoughts. Mr. Morawetz, please.
Yeah, welcome to the 5th ASEAN event series, Bridges, Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace. Bridges is facilitated by the International Peace Foundation, a non-political and non-religious foundation under the patronage of 21 Nobel Peace Prize laureates based in Vienna. The events are hosted in cooperation with various local partners, including some of the country's main universities, and I would like to thank the National University of Singapore for hosting our event today. Having started in October last year, Bridges will now be continuously held in Singapore until March, involving the participation of Nobel laureates for peace, physics, chemistry, medicine, and economics. The 5th ASEAN series of Bridges follows the series of 500 Bridges events, which the International Peace Foundation has previously hosted in Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam since 2003 as an independent contribution to the Decade for a Culture of Peace and Nonviolence, initiated and promoted by the United Nations General Assembly. The pluralistic program of Bridges highlights the International Peace Foundation's intercultural and interdisciplinary approach towards peace. The foundation does not take sides, but acts as a mediator by creating an independent platform for dialogue where representatives of science, politics, economy, culture, religion, the media, and youth can meet, share their viewpoints, listen to each other, and find mutual ways of understanding and cooperation. Therefore, the foundation itself is a bridge and a facilitator between different language groups in our divided societies, where politicians speak another language than artists, and business and religious leaders another language than scientists. In a highly interdependent world, problems cannot be solved by either one of these language groups only, but by working together. After the success of its Bridges programs in Thailand and other ASEAN countries, the International Peace Foundation has been invited by other countries in this region to build further bridges towards peace and international understanding by expanding its program in Southeast Asia to stimulate the intellectual, scientific, and cultural exchange in the region. The aim of Bridges is to facilitate and strengthen dialogue and communication between societies in Southeast Asia with their multiple cultures and faiths, as well as with peoples in other parts of the world, to promote understanding and trust. The events aim at building bridges with local universities and other institutions in Southeast Asia to establish long-term relationships with Nobel laureates in all fields, which may result in common research programs and other forms of collaboration. By enhancing science, technology, and education as a basis for peace and development, the events may lead to a better cooperation for the advancement of peace, freedom, and security in the region with the active involvement of the young generation, ASEAN's key to the future. This is why Bridges is not designed as a one-time event, but as a continuing process of synergies to make the series of events a sustainable success for Singapore and for the region as a whole. I am grateful to the Singapore Honorary Chairman of Bridges, whom Dr. ElBaradei met today, the Honorable S.R. Nathan, the Singapore Chairman of Bridges, His Excellency Minister Heng Swee Keat, to the National University of Singapore, as well as to our other partners and sponsors who have enabled us to make bridges a reality. I would like to say thank you to everyone present today for taking part in this program. May it help us to facilitate a new culture of peace through dialogue, transcending its definition as merely the absence of war or armed conflict, into a new understanding what the basis for peace is: education. In this spirit, we welcome today the 2005 Nobel Laureate for Peace, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, who has kindly agreed to come to Singapore to support the events. We look forward to his keynote speech and to his important contribution to build bridges. Thank you very much.
Mr. Morawetz. May we now invite Professor Kishore Mahbubani, Dean, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, to introduce our guest speaker. Professor Mahbubani, please.
Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, my friend, Mr. Uwe Morawetz, Professor Tan Chor Chuan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I think you all know that Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei has had an amazing life. And I would like to share the story, full story of his life with you, but they only gave me 3 minutes. So if I do that, it'll take away the 1 hour that's been assigned to him to deliver the lecture. So what I'll do first is that I'll first give you a very brief summary of the history of his life, and then conclude with a personal note, which I hope will bring out the remarkable character of Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei. He was born in Cairo, Egypt in 1942, graduated from the University of Cairo with the degree of law in 1962, became a diplomat with the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that's a very big deal, by the way. As someone who was a diplomat for 33 years, we all know that the Egyptian Foreign Ministry has always produced remarkable diplomats for generations. In 1974, he received his PhD in international law from New York University, and if I'm correct, worked closely with our late friend Tom Frank, who was a good mutual friend of both of us. He then joined UNITA, and he also became an adjunct law professor in NYU. In 1984, he joined the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, where he worked for 25 years. And he was also sent to Iraq after the Gulf War to dismantle Saddam Hussein's nuclear program. He then, as you all know, headed the IAEA as Director General for 12 years, from 1997 to 2009, and helped to foster nuclear disarmament and the responsible use of nuclear energy. And as mentioned earlier, he was awarded the Nobel Prize together with IAEA in 2005. He's also received tremendous number of awards from many countries, including, of course, from his own country, Egypt. After retiring from the IAEA, he returned to Egypt, and then, as we know, played a very active role in the political transition that was taking place over there. He was placed under house arrest in 2011, but he defied the government curfew to go and protest in Tahrir Square. He also produced a book in 2011 entitled The Age of Deception, Nuclear Diplomacy in Treacherous Times. And after President Mohamed Morsi was ousted in 2013, Mohamed ElBaradei served for a time as Egypt's acting vice president for foreign policy under the acting president Adli Mansour, but then he resigned in protest against the crackdown. He's married and he has 2 beautiful children, Laila and Mustafa. Now that's a very brief description of a rich and remarkable life. But I can describe the remarkable aspects through the 2 times that our lives intersected, which is unusual. I was born and brought up in Singapore, and he was born and brought up in Egypt. And it crossed at 2 points. Firstly, in the years 2001, 2002, Singapore was a member of the UN Security Council. And these 2 years were very crucial historical years, because that's when 9/11 happened, and also that was led to the build-up to the Iraq War. And I can tell you, in the build-up to the Iraq War, the IAEA was under tremendous pressure to certify that actually Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass disarmament. But I can tell you that it's in times of great pressure that you discover who is truly courageous, because courage at the end of the day is contextual. And at that moment of white heat, when the IAEA was under tremendous pressure to bend, he refused to do so and preserve the independence of the IAEA, which, as you know, was ultimately vindicated, because after the Iraq War ended, it was shown that the IAEA was right. That was followed a few years later by a remarkable invitation I got from Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei to serve on a commission of eminent persons under the leadership of the former Mexican president, Ernesto Zedillo, to look at the workings of the IAEA and what we could do to strengthen it. And of course, having gone to the meetings there, I discovered what a remarkable leader he was of that organization. And even though in that position you are under, again, pressure to be, how do you say, a good civil servant and be careful of what you say, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei would speak freely and courageously. And I discovered in that commission that while the nuclear powers were very happy to promote nuclear disarmament as required for under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they were very reluctant to fulfill their own obligation under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to reduce their nuclear weapons stockpile. So only Mohamed ElBaradei would have the courage to say to them, and this statement captures his remarkable forthrightness. He said that the major nuclear powers, when they were calling on others to give up nuclear weapons, were not giving up theirs, were behaving just like people who continue to dangle a cigarette from their mouth and tell everybody else not to smoke. That takes pure courage. So you can see that this is a man who fully deserved his Nobel Peace Prize, and he's really become a living role model for all those who want to serve in international organizations. And therefore it gives me great pleasure to introduce and to welcome Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei. Thank you.
President Tan, Dean Lewis, my very good friend, Kishore Mahbubani, Mr. Morawetz. First, let me thank Kishore for his exceedingly kind words. And I better live up to his expectation and say something meaningful to you. It's an honor and pleasure for me to speak at the National University of Singapore, a leading global university, with a mission, quote, to transform the way people think and do things through education, research, and service. It's quite appropriate to talk here about one of the central issues facing humanity. How should we think, and what do we need to do to transform our world into a more peaceful and humane one? Durable peace remains a quest that humanity has been grappling with without much success. Wars have dominated the human timeline since recorded history. Hundreds of millions have lost their lives to violence under the guise of religion, nationalism, ethnicity, and other alleged casus belli. We can barely remember the causes of many of those wars. Some of the states involved no longer even exist. We organize ourselves around city-states, empires, and sovereign states. We had the Peace of Westphalia, the Congress of Vienna, the League of Nations, and the United Nations. We endeavored to create a security system based on balance of power and on collective security. But peace has remained elusive, and force and violence have remained our primary choice to settle differences. Today, unfortunately, we are not doing much better, and our human conditions has become even more paradoxical. Amazing creativity that has enabled us to make a huge leap forward in the way we understand our world and ourselves. But at the same time, a striking inability to translate these accomplishments into concrete actions to sustain peace and security and uphold human dignity. We are all in awe of the amazing scientific and technological advances that have dramatically transformed our life. Ever-expanding ability to communicate and interact, real-time access to what is going on around the globe, major advances in medical and biological fields, human genome mapping and stem cell research, to wit, a surge in the physics field through the discovery of the Higgs boson particle, and in the industrial field through 3D printing. In one sense, we have become closer than ever before. But ironically, in another sense, we have become distant from each other, with a creeping feeling of otherness, coupled with increasing inequity and polarization, and in some cases, stereotyping bordering on dehumanization. It is no exaggeration to observe that the state of the world today, in my view, is appalling. Poverty and hunger continue at dreadful levels. Some conflicts have been left to fester for generations. Brutal repression and denial of human dignity are the hallmark of a third of the world nations. The sanctity of life depends on who is dying and where. Rich countries are apathetic to the misery of the poor. Inequality in the distribution of wealth amongst countries and people has reached obscene levels. The human rights law designed to protect human dignity and the humanitarian law intended to preserve a modicum of humanity to war and destruction are both now cited more for violation than for compliance. The responsibility to protect principle, articulated in 2005, so the international community can guard against genocide and other heinous crimes, now almost always rings hollow. Over 50 countries, many of them disgracefully well-established democracies, reportedly aided and abetted odious acts of torture and rendition. Target killing, cyber attacks, wiretapping, and other violation of basic human values and decency are being systematically resorted to without even any accountability. An effort to establish an international system of criminal justice through the International Criminal Court has until now been far from universal and limited in application to the weak and defeated. In recent past, the international community has practically limited itself to hand-wringing while millions of innocent civilians were slaughtered in places such as Rwanda, Congo, and Darfur. And today, as I'm speaking to you, violence continues to ravage our planet in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. Senseless, destructive, dehumanizing conflicts. A mindset of Carthago delenda est. Let us destroy Carthage. What is worse, due to annihilation weapons at our disposal, we continue to live with the danger of sleepwalking into self-destruction. Almost half of the world population struggles to live on $2 a day. Some 900 million people do not have enough to eat. Millions die every year because of lack of access to medical care. They just can't afford it. Masses of refugees live in squalor, yearning for a home. In contrast, the richest 1% will own more than all the rest by 2016. And the 80 richest people now have as much money as the poorest 3.5 billion people. And the gap continues to widen. This cannot stand. I believe that poverty is the most lethal weapon of mass destruction, because these are not just numbers. The plight of the poor is invariably compounded by and result in human rights abuses, a lack of good governance, marginalization, and a deep sense of injustice and anger. Such combination is the most fertile breeding ground for conflict, civil strife, and other forms of violence and extremism. In this environment, fanaticism and often authoritarianism continue to hide behind different masks of ideology, religion, ethnicity, or ultra-nationalism to commit the most atrocious of crimes, whether by non-state actors or by repressive regimes. Sadly, the ones footing the bill are the innocent civilians, who are blithely dismissed as collateral damage, without even being provided with the most basic humanitarian assistance due to so-called lack of resources, which the UN and other agencies continue to almost beg for. The irony is that we spend around a mere 1% on peacekeeping operations and disaster relief of the $1.7 trillion we spend on armament per year. Under these conditions, are we surprised that the logic among some is, if you don't treat me as a human being, why do you expect me to act as one? And if you don't care about my life, why should I care about yours? It is a foul environment that breeds violence, tyranny, and fascism. In our increasingly interconnected world, however, where the city is almost the planet, our connectivity is not limited to opportunities, but also to risks. Our most significant global threats are invariably threats without borders. Poverty, terrorism, climate change, weapons of mass destruction, communicable diseases, cybersecurity, human trafficking, illegal drugs, and I can go on and on. Traditional notions of sovereignty and national security are being constantly challenged. By their nature, these threats require global cooperation. No one country can overcome them on its own. Our actions or non-actions eventually comes back to haunt us, no matter where we are. no part of the world can remain quarantined any longer, as we have witnessed in shock recently. Our policies and international institutions have unfortunately become anachronistic. The UN system of organizations suffer from structural deficiencies and lack of authority and resources. As a result, they are becoming steadily polarized and paralyzed. The failure of the UN Security Council to take preventive measures or provide adequate responses over the years is a stark case in point. In the word of Navi Pillai, the former UN Human Rights Chief, she said, greater responses by the Security Council would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, unquote. We are, to my mind, increasingly facing a crisis of governance. Governments that pursue short-term myopic policies which fail to address long-term global challenges, and international institutions that remain bereft of the tools needed to address these challenges. This begs the question whether the structures and processes of global governance need to be recalibrated. I turn now to the weapons at our disposal. Nuclear weapons are a legacy of the Cold War, but a quarter of a century later, it borders on insanity that we still have over 16,000 nuclear weapons and around 2,000 of them on alert status. The abolition of nuclear weapons is alarmingly no longer a fashionable topic. Yet, it is evident to me that with the technology out of the box, and as long as some countries choose to rely on nuclear weapons directly or through bilateral or multilateral alliances such as NATO, others will eventually seek to acquire them. A security concept based on, quote, some are more equal than others, and on a system of deterrence that is irrelevant to extremists with no return address is unsustainable and almost naive. It raises the question of how long the center of the non-proliferation regime can hold in places like the Middle East, East Asia, and other areas of potential conflicts. More ominously, how long will it take before a terrorist group lays its hand on a nuclear weapon? It is imperative, of course, that no more countries acquire them. But to that end, it is equally imperative that the weapon states divest themselves of these weapons. Under the NPT, the weapon states not only have an obligation, which was concluded 45 years ago, weapon states not only have the obligation to negotiate in good faith toward nuclear disarmament, but equally, in the word of the International Court of Justice, quote, the obligation to achieve a precise results, nuclear disarmament in all its aspects. However, after more than over 4 decades of undertaking these obligations, nuclear weapons are moving in the opposite direction. They are modernizing their arsenals and are planning to spend hundreds of billions of dollars for that purpose. Almost all prominent strategic experts, including a number of former secretaries of defense and former secretary of states in the United States, who have lived through the Cold War, have argued strongly that reliance on nuclear weapons is becoming, in their words, increasingly hazardous and decreasingly effective. And these are the words of people like Henry Kissinger, Carl Schultz, Bill Perry, Sam Nunn. In 2011, former US Secretary of Defense Bill Perry talked about 3 false alarms he knows of in which Soviet missiles were thought to be screaming toward the US. He said, to this day, unquote, to this day, I believe that we avoided nuclear catastrophe as much by good luck as by good management, unquote. One of his predecessors, Robert McNamara, which I gave his memorial lecture a couple of months ago at Harvard Kennedy School, put it in stark terms. The indefinite combination of human fallibility and nuclear weapons will lead to the destruction of nations, unquote. Even President Obama emphasized the horrific nature of any use of nuclear weapons. He mentioned, one nuclear weapon exploded in one city. No matter where it happens, there is no end to what the consequences may be, ultimately for our survival, unquote. But with all these warnings, have we put our money where our mouths are? Have we seriously tried to drastically reduce the numbers of weapons in existence? Have we seriously tried to alter the nuclear launch warning system? As I mentioned, many of these weapons are on high status alert, which something like an hour before you have to respond to a reported attack, which could have been a computer error, or could be a computer error. Have we seriously tried to reduce our reliance on nuclear weapons in national security strategies? Have we seriously started thinking about the security architecture in a nuclear weapon-free world, including the need to deter and defeat possible cheats? This, in my view, is a dismal record and raises the question whether our commitment to nuclear disarmament is genuine. In addition to nuclear weapons, other weapons of mass destruction are still with us. If you rely on the mother of all inhumane weapons, and I have security concern, why should I commit not to acquire other WMD weapons? This, I assume, the logic of some of those who have not joined the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons or the Convention on the Prohibition of Biological Weapons in the regions of Middle East and East Asia. War and peace, like many other human conditions, are of our own creation. It depends on the environment we construct and the mindset we cultivate. What we need is an environment based on inclusiveness, equity, trust, mutual respect, and dialogue, and not on double standards, polarization, sanctions, humiliation, and dictates. An environment that constrains the human impulse for violence. If we work on eliminating the drivers of insecurity and violence, including the abolition of all weapons of mass destruction, the odds are we will be able to avert or at least mitigate most wars. If we work on the drivers of peace, particularly equity and respect for human dignity, the odds are we will be able to adjust our mindset and understand that we are the same human species, irrespective of our superficial differences of race, religion, or ethnicity. We would realize that we are increasingly sharing the same core values and that it is the same cake, albeit with different icings. Equity, compassion, and above all, human solidarity should be our compass. For by now, we should have learned that I am not free unless everybody is free. And I am not secure unless everybody is secure. If we maintain the status quo and the same mindset, possibly we will be able to travel to Mars. But certainly, we will continue to kill each other. One day, I shudder to think we might see Rajiv Gandhi's warning in 1998 come true. when India was still hoping for a world free from nuclear weapons. A nuclear war that would mean, as he put it, the end of life as we know it on our planet Earth. The status quo is clearly no longer sustainable because we are not just grappling with an abstract ethical question, but with an existential question of survival. We keep uttering platitudes about the need to reach out and work together, while in fact retrenching back into a bunker mentality. We continue to make noise about the major dangers we face, but we carry on in our same old ways and somehow hope for different results. We seem incapable of acknowledging and addressing the causes and not just the symptoms. And the symptoms are more visible by the day. Violence is spreading, chaos is disseminating, and extremism is metastasizing. We urgently need to think differently and act differently by charting a course based on togetherness and human solidarity. In other words, address global challenges through global response based on the common good and not on myopic national interests, and where the dignity of every human being is our first priority. The lethal combination of poverty and repression is the primary cause for insecurity and human debasement. We need to combat both. We need to shift the focus in the interaction between North and South, East and West, from rivalry and competition to cooperation and complementarity, using economic models that aim to achieve peace through prosperity, advance science and technology for development, with emphasis on values and institutions that promote dignity and champion democracy. We need global institutions endowed with the authority and resources to address the interconnected challenges we face. We need a global system of justice to which we all subscribe, without any claims of exceptionalism. We need a functioning system of collective security based on equity, inclusiveness, and engagement. Weapons of mass destruction have no place in such a system. Finally, we have to understand that the challenges we face are bigger than any single country, conflict, or issue. And we have to recognize that we are one human family, and that none of us is going to prevail alone. We'll either swim together or sink together. We need to finally find a way to live with each other in peace, freedom, and dignity. William James said, and that applies to Singapore, we are like islands in the sea, separate on the surface, but connected in the deep. We have lost our way. It is time, in my view, to save ourselves from ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. ElBaradei. We have now come to the question and answer session for this evening. Professor Mahbubani will be moderating this session. And if you have any questions for Dr. ElBaradei, please raise your hand and one of our staff will hand you a microphone. Please state your name and your organization before beginning with your question. Professor Mahbubani, please.
Thank you. I can honestly say that you have genuinely depressed us. So I'm going to try and see whether I can inject some good news first into the discussion before we throw the floor open for more questions. I mean, I'm glad you spoke about the area of nuclear weapons. You are the world's number one authority in that area. But if I remember correctly what I learned in school, in the 1960s there was actually an expectation that with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, that the number will grow from about 25 or so. I mean, Brazil, Argentina, Taiwan, South Korea, etc., were all preparing to get nuclear weapons. So in that sense, at least the one piece of good news is that the NPT succeeded in preventing that massive proliferation, and you only ended up with, I guess, India, Pakistan, Israel, and possibly North Korea with nuclear weapons. So we haven't completely kept the box shut, but we kept most of it shut. Wouldn't you say that is a result of the good work that you did?
I think
it should be on.
I think it's, of course, I would not deny that we could have been in a much worse situation. We could have been, again, self-destruct. That is clear. And President Kennedy, it's correct, in the 60s, predicted that, by the end of the century, we'll have like 15, 20 nuclear weapon states. We didn't. So that is one, you can argue that way. But to me, that's an apologist argument, frankly. That is, hey, we haven't yet destroyed ourselves. Let us stand up and cheer. When I look around, as I said, that 25 years after the end of the Cold War, when everybody was talking, including ourselves, about a new world order, about a cooperative security system, I look around and I see that we still have 16,000 nuclear weapons. I look around and see that 2,000 of them on high status alert. And high status alert, as I've been talking to people like Sam Nunn and other major generals who understand the issue, that at least a couple of years ago, it was half an hour, if you get a report of a nuclear attack, that you have to respond. It's less than the time, as Sam Nunn used to say, of having a cup of coffee, where the president will have to answer, which could be, as I said, a computer error, unauthorized use. So why are we still in that situation? When I was last month in Boston, and you read that the U.S. is planning to spend $1 trillion, to modernize their arsenal, and it is not just the U.S. alone. Every single nuclear weapon state is modernizing its arsenal. Then I look, as you did read, about the NPT commitment. I mean, the NPT, as we know, it was a bargain. And all the non-nuclear weapon states, for people who do not know, committed that they would not have nuclear weapon, but on the other hand, the important part of the bargain, those who have it will get rid of them. If these guys are looking around and see that you still have everybody who had nuclear weapons at that time, still have them and more, And we know that they have no intention, frankly, to give them anytime soon. And we know that they're still relying on them as a matter of power and prestige. This is also, why then we will be surprised, Kishore, if others will say, if they're squeezed, and this is the case, say, of some North Korea. This is possibly could have been the case of Iraq. Well, why can't I buy myself some power and prestige and a security and insurance policy that I will not be attacked? I mean, if they would have looked, if people are watching and they have compared Iraq and North Korea, people knew, of course, despite their claims at the time, that Iraq didn't have nuclear weapons. And therefore, they went on and invaded Iraq. Nobody dared to touch North Korea, because a good part of it, they know that they have, they could have, destroyed Seoul, which is 30 kilometers away from them. So if you are a country in a conflict situation, wouldn't you have been tempted to have nuclear weapons? And even if you don't have nuclear weapons, why do we have some of these countries continue not to subscribe to the Chemical Weapon Convention or the Biological Convention, again, and continue to have these? Well, these are, as I said, it depends whether you want to see the cup half full or half empty. But, this is not an issue I would like to see a cup half half full. I mean, the cup has to be completely full, because we're really talking about a question of our own survival.
Yeah. No, I agree with you in principle, but I'm just trying to point out some of the positive developments. But the other thing that really surprised me, I must say that, I was actually quite shocked when I read the article in the Wall Street Journal written by Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Bill Perry, Sam Nunn. Because, I know a little bit about these men, but for these sort of hard Cold War warriors to come out and say, hey, it's time to give up nuclear weapons, was a shock to me. But what surprised me was that I thought with these four guys speaking out, they would change the consensus, especially, you say, among the nuclear powers in the attitude toward nuclear weapons. I'm surprised they have had so far zero impact. Why is that so?
Well, I think a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, have wrote recently a book called Double Government, which basically says that irrespective of what the leaders want to do, they cannot do anything. There is a bureaucracy, entrenched bureaucracy. I mean, it's a book about the US, that no matter what you do, the bureaucracy will continue to do exactly what they want to do. And this is Michael Glennon, has a book at Tufts University Fletcher School, and he believed that what we think that Congress and
it's called deep government, isn't it, or double government? Double government. Okay.
Yeah. So it's I wonder with you. I mean, when I see people like Kissinger is now in his 90s, or Bill Perry and others.
91. Yeah.
91. He's still going to places. He's still arguing strongly, and these guys, I mean, know what they're talking about. I mean, they feel that if you take a long-term view, you will not be able to stop the proliferation, and particularly that they have seen that I think their number one fear is that the access by terrorists to a nuclear weapon. I mean, that is, or some of the rogue state, as they call it, or what have you. Yeah? Because if you have, for example, God forbid, a terrorist group, an ISIL, say. And some of these groups have become quite sophisticated, as we have seen recently. I mean, if they'll have a weapon, if they will have it, they will use it. I mean, they have nothing to lose. The whole idea that, the deterrence is irrelevant to them.
I'm going to ask you one more question before I throw the floor open. And this is a slightly delicate question. But I got this insight, actually, from a mutual friend of ours. I think you knew Ahmed ElBaradei, the former Egyptian ambassador to UN, former Egyptian foreign minister. His wife is Laila, and a good friend of ours. And one thing that she said to me, which surprised me, I had dinner with her in Cairo a couple of years ago. And she said the big change she noticed when she came back to Cairo was that in the past, it was when a woman like her walked down the streets with her hair uncovered, she had no problem whatsoever. But she said now, she says, Kishore, when I walk on the street, I can almost feel a sense of hostility towards me. They expect me to cover myself and so on and so forth. How do you explain this sociological change that has happened?
Well, this is much more probably long-term complicated story, but I think, yes. I mean, I think when a country feels humiliated, and Egypt got humiliated in 1967 when they strongly or badly defeated in a war, and you still try then to go to look for some identity, something to give you comfort, if you like. And some of these people thought that this is the way, maybe go back more into religion. Whether that is part of religion, it's a different story. But a lot of also at that time, a lot of Egyptian, because of the economy was in terrible shape, went to the Gulf. And there's quite a few million went to the Gulf. And they came back with a different kind of explanation, different kind of Islam, if you would like to say, different kind of reading of Islam.
More conservative. Yeah.
More conservative Islam. It's Islam in the desert is more conservative than Islam in the valley. I mean, it's a more conservative, more rigid. So that's part of the explanation. But as I said, I mean, I think when people feel depressed, they go to church or the synagogue or the temple. I mean, that's partly, I think, could be explained in that way.
Okay, let me throw the floor open for questions. Anybody has got a... Yes, please. Gentleman over there. Yeah, the microphone will come to you. Yeah. I think you've been told, identify yourself. Short, sharp question.
Right.
Very good evening, Dr. Mehbubani, Dr. ElBaradei. I'm Aditya. I'm a master's student in civil engineering here at NUS. My question is for Dr. ElBaradei. Sir, do you suggest any new international organization for the purposes you had mentioned in your short speech, or rather you recommend strengthening of the current UN-based organizations? I mean, this comes in the light of the consistent failure of the Security Council and UN-based organizations to either stay objective or to, or to preserve peace. Thank you.
The question is, should we stay with the current UN-based organizations, or should we try to create a new set of organizations? Should we keep the UN Security Council or give up the UN Security Council?
I think obviously you need to reform the system. I mean, I think you cannot just throw away the existing system, as much as I would like to do, but it will not.
Well, you wouldn't mind getting rid of it.
I mean, maybe it's easier to have a clean start, but you can't. I mean, you probably just have to reform the system. I still, as I said, if I look at the frustration everybody gets, for example, with the Security Council, when the veto is being used and abused, when people are dying and all we hear is statement and resolution and nothing absolutely is happening. When I see 200,000 people died in Syria in the last 3 years, and the council continued to wring its hand, or in Darfur, or in many other places, and again because we are polarized, and there is a systemic dysfunction to hold that. If I see, for example, a country like India is not part of the decision-making process in Security Council, I mean, how does that project a council that's representative of the emerging powers, So, but if I even go to the easier issues like refugees, there is a UN Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. Antonio Guterres used to be the former Prime Minister of Portugal. Yeah. I saw him a couple of weeks ago on television, begging, for $8 billion, to deal with the plight of the increasing number of refugees. And he is not getting these $8 billion. He said he's only getting $4 billion. He's getting 50% of what he needs. At the time, as I said, that the $8 billion is less than 0.25% of what we spent on armament. So it is not, if you talk even to economists, it says our problem is not at all a question of money. There's enough money in the world to deal with all these issues. Where I think it's a question of mindset. It's a question we have not adjusted our system of governance. And Dean Mahbubani just gave me a book on governance, and I'm very keen to read that, because we need to fix the government.
Thank you for promoting my book.
It's a question of government alone are not. If you take look at Iraq or Afghanistan, where the U.S. has been deeply embedded there. Well, after 10 years, is the situation the situation is still a mess. So there are these issues that no one country can deal with it. And it's a change. We need the change of mindset. And part of that, of course, is to get a system that is responsive. And as I said, forget about Security Council. Look at WHO. WHO, for example, could not alert in time the emergence or the Ebola disease virus because their budget was cut 50%. The emergency preparedness budget was cut this year 51%, and it probably was a couple of $1 million. So we keep shooting ourselves in the foot, and then when we see the problem, we continue then to scream and say and spend 10 times more money, after the fact.
By the way, thank you very much. By the way, Margaret Chan is in Singapore today. She and I were at the Ministry of Health conference this morning.
Okay, great.
Okay, let me come up there, gentleman over there. Maybe the two of you can ask questions together, one after the other. The microphone will come towards you. We'll take two questions together. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ali from Faculty of Engineering in US. It was a pleasure listening to you, Dr. ElBaradei. Maybe my question is very idealistic, but do you envision a world without nuclear weapons in the future? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to ask your question too? Go.
I have primarily two questions. Okay, first, I'm from Pakistan. I did a master's in US. I'm working as a subsea engineer in an oil and gas company over here. The questions would be why the West has discriminated against Iran on nuclear issue, saying they can enrich weapons-grade uranium, while Israel has proven a stockpile of 200 warheads, and nobody talks about it.
So your question about Pakistan and Israel?
No, it's about Israel. It's about Iran and Israel.
Yeah, Iran and Israel. Okay, yeah.
Well, whether I'd like to see a world free from nuclear weapons, obviously I do. Whether I think I will see it in my lifetime, obviously not. But I mean,
you may live another 50 years.
Well, President Trump probably will help with that. But it's a question I put to you because you are the future. You are the younger generation, and you are the one who can make a difference. If you want to continue to live with Damocles' sword hanging over your heads, go right ahead. If you want to change, it's you who can change the scenarios, who can change the landscape, who can change the way we think about our security, about our interaction as one human family. I mean, this is a question that is not going to go away, tomorrow or after tomorrow. It's a very embedded, dysfunctional system of how we treat each other, how we look at each other. On Iran and Israel, well, again, it's a question you can, without getting into detail, there's a lot of subjectivities. I think Dean Mahbubani mentioned, that, being, working in and trying to be objective in a subjective world, as an international civil servant.
You pay a heavy price.
You pay a heavy price. And I would suggest that you would read my book and you see some answers. How you try to say that we can't work with double standard, that we cannot, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, that's not unfortunately how the world operates, and this is one example. But again, it's a lack of trust. It's a stereotyping. It's not trying to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. I mean, these are some of the problems we usually get, So it's usually no one have a hold of truth. No one is 100% right. But we need to talk to each other. I mean, if you mention Iran, I can just mention to you that for 5 years I've been pleading during my time at the IAEA with the U.S. to talk to the Iranians. I mean, for 5 years they refused to talk to them until they change their behavior. But how you change your behavior, without the other party talking to you? These are, some of now, they are finally realizing that this is the time to talk to them, and they all acknowledge that the kind of negotiation going on today could have been had 10 years ago, and we could have had that agreement even in better terms 10 years ago.
I think you once famously said, "Can the world say yes?" Yeah. When Iran made the offer, I think. Yeah. Okay, next question. Okay, let me come to the gentleman here, then I'll come to over there. Please go ahead. Gentleman in blue shirt. Just stand up. Stand up and the microphone will come to you.
Hello, my name is Daniel Silverman. I'm a sophomore at Yale and US College. My question in a single sentence is, as former director of the IAEA, do you imagine that nuclear warfare as it is conventionally imagined today would somehow become obsolete in the future? And to elaborate on this question, just very briefly, most of us here are familiar with Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program of the 1980s. Back then it was technologically unfeasible, and I think today it still is. But in the future, would a sort of disarmament program around the lines of Star Wars or similar to it be imaginable and thus eliminate or neutralize nuclear war through ICBMs?
The question is, I didn't get the question. I must say you referred to the Star Wars, which is not of our generation, as you know. and you're saying that it would be possible to prevent nuclear warfare, is it? Is that what you're saying?
I'm referring not to the movies, but to the program that Reagan tried to initiated the.
Oh yeah. But would that doesn't prevent nuclear.
But my question is, it was technologically unfeasible during the 80s, and it's still today, light years ahead. But in the future, could we imagine a program like this being built that would neutralize nuclear warfare?
I guess your basic question is: will technology develop to prevent nuclear weapons?
Nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Well, it would be great if everybody would have that program. You see, but if you would only have it, say, in some Western countries, or to protect the U.S. or to protect the NATO countries, the impact of that the other countries will have tried to triple or quadruple the number of weapons, with the hope that some of them will penetrate. You see, that's a problem with the missile defense shield. That it created a lot of angst, if you like, in Russia, in China.
The ABM program.
The ABM, and the anti-ballistic missile, the abolition of that, of that treaty, created a lot of discomfort, if you like, concern. So it's again, if I'm saying that, I think that will even make things worse, in my view, unless, as I said, it's spread equally to everybody. Because again, if you are protected, then you are in a better position to use nuclear weapon without any fear of retaliation. And the other parties will try to have more weapons, so we'll be able to overcome your defense shield. So it's a concept. We are living with this mutual assured destruction, which is called MAD, rightly so. That basically, if you destroy me, I have the ability for a second strike. And that's where we supposedly did not kill each other. But if you continue then to get into a technology that change that doctrine, you will end up, in fact, accelerating the possibility of use of nuclear weapons. So I'm not a fan of missile defense shield, and many other people are not either.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all. A hand over there, and I'll come to you in a minute. Hand on the other side.
Good evening, Dr. ElBaradei and Mr. Mahbubani. The question that I'm asking, I think,
you're supposed to identify yourself.
Oh yes, I'm Eric. I'm Eric Weng. I'm from SB Joshua. Now, the question I'm asking is to seek your insight, because being Egyptian, you possibly might have an insight, and I believe that it is also somewhat related to what Professor Mahbubani was asking or referring to earlier on. Perhaps an extension of it regarding the lady who now feels slightly more pressurized when she left her head uncovered. And also, I think it's somewhat related to weapons of mass destruction, because here, again, there's mass destruction, but in a very different form. I'm talking about the phenomena in which you have young people who are highly, highly motivated to join a movement to right certain wrongs that I think they perceive. So can you put it in perspective? Let me give you the most recent example. After a pilot was executed, the Grand Imam said that this sort of anti-religion behavior is punishable by certain measures. And the Grand Imam being from the highest authority in Egypt, and can we have your insight on what is it that attracts so many young people? They are so driven. Is it because of poverty? Is it because some historic wrongs that were committed against certain communities? Was it because of that? Can you help us to understand this phenomena? Because it seems highly, highly unusual that so many people can be so motivated, all being driven in this very focused direction.
Sure.
Could you help us?
I think he's talking about young people who could join ISIL,
Yeah. Well, I mean, extremism is not a new phenomenon. I mean, you can ask, why do we have more extremism right now? I mean, my take on it as much is that when people feel loss of hope, when they are being oppressed, when they are poor, when they have no future, they lose identity with the state. And it's become very attractive for them to try to reach out for some meaning to their life, for some identity. And if somebody will tell them that you are going to, and again, it doesn't really, if somebody tells them that you are being persecuted because there are double standards, being applied, and that some of the Muslim countries, for example, are being treated in an inferior way, to me, it's an expression of anger. It has nothing to do with the woman who is, wearing a cover for her hair or not. It has nothing to do with religion to me. I mean, we have seen a lot of extremism wearing different, as I said, we have seen extremism in uber-nationalism, in fascism and Nazism, and we have seen in Italy, I think, the Red Brigade. It's a phenomenon we will not, I don't think, we'll be able to get rid of it. There is always some, offshoot of mainstream. But your question is correct. I mean, why do we have it to be attractive to a large scale? I mean, that is usually you have like 100, or why do you have something like 30,000? Well, you have to see how people feel in that part of the world right now, the Middle East. People feel humiliated, feel loss of hope, are seeing violence to be the way of daily life, and for young people, they are getting, as I said, they have nothing to lose. That's my take on it. But I think that's why I keep saying, if you create an environment when people are treated with a modicum of human decency, you will not have that large numbers of people who are ready to go into so-called ISIL or what have you.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes to go. I see. How many hands do we have? I think there are too many.
We shop some.
I tell you what. Can we take maybe three together, very quick? But if you don't mind, the faster your question, the more we can take. So let's start with the lady over there, please. Yes.
Good evening, sir. I would like to ask, do you think that there are other reasons hindering the United States disarmament apart from the bureaucratic interests that you've mentioned?
Right.
Sorry, say that again. What's your question?
U.S. refusal to disarm its nuclear arsenal, apart from the bureaucratic interests that Mr. Dr. ElBaradei has mentioned earlier on. The other
will the U.S. disarm?
Yeah.
Oh.
Why U.S. refuses to disarm its nuclear arsenal despite advocating for a global zero?
The question is, why is the U.S. not disarming? Or
why is the U.S. refusing to disarm?
Why is the U.S. refusing to disarm? Okay, that's an easy question to answer. The next question over here, and then the gentleman up there, okay? And we're taking three quickly. Over here. Okay, doesn't matter. Yeah. One here and one up there. Yeah. If you don't mind, quick questions of that. Why is the U.S. refusing to disarm?
Thank you, Dr. ElBaradei, for your insightful speech. I'm Ernest, and I'm a pre-undergraduate. I'm matriculating in NUS this year. So, Dr. ElBaradei, my question is regarding the current situation in Egypt. How do you see President Sisi's his term as president? Do you think he's similar in a way to the old regime of President Mubarak? And do you think that right now what's happening will sow the seeds of a second revolution in Egypt? Thank you.
Okay, I would say that's a very difficult question. That gentleman in red up there. Richard, yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, Professor Mehbubani and Dr. ElBaradei. My name is Arjun Dhar. I've just graduated from ACS Independent. My question is for Dr. ElBaradei. Dr. ElBaradei, you spoke about the need for a greater global push towards values that promote equality and dignity. Powerful countries today have the power to influence and humiliate less powerful countries. My question is, how can powerful countries be persuaded to relinquish the economic and political leverage they wield in the interest of collective progress? Thank you.
The question is, what can the powerful countries do to use their leverage to?
How can we persuade the powerful countries to relinquish the leverage they hold over less powerful countries?
Okay. Wow, that's... okay. An interesting question. Okay, the first one was, why is the U.S. refusing to disarm? The second question, what do you think basically of the present government, presidency? That's the most difficult question for you, I know.
because this is a live webcast, so he knows that whatever he says here will reach Cairo. Yeah. And the question, the third question is...
it's even a live webcast. I didn't even know that.
That's why I wanted to alert you. I'm very aware of the political situation that so that's why I'm make sure I'm going to be helpful to him. But the third question is what can we do to persuade the powerful countries to give up leverage on less powerful countries? I would say that's a mission impossible, but that's your view.
Well, on why the U.S. I mean, I think again, why it's not the U.S. alone. It's Russia. It's China. It's everybody who had. And everybody is waiting for the other. Of course, it's Russia and the U.S. It's the U.S. and Russia who have to take the lead because they have 95% of the nuclear weapon arsenal in the world. But I guess old habits die hard, and again, you'll have a lot of people there who are saying that nuclear weapon kept the peace since 1945, and there is a lot of evil over there around the world, and we need to keep it because it's much more difficult to give up nuclear weapon because you have to think of an alternative, and it's much easier to be lazy and rely on what you have, and despite the fact that and everybody, as we discussed, everybody who is in the know understand that this is not sustainable and this could lead to a horror, a human catastrophe or existential catastrophe. So it's again my feeling that people who have been working in that field for 30, 40 years are not going to change their mind. You need people, who are younger generation, who are coming, without preconceived ideas. Barack Obama in 2009 made a beautiful speech in Prague, committing the U.S. to a world free from nuclear weapons, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize, in fact, for that. And
that's before he gave the speech, though.
I think after he gave the speech. I believe after he gave the speech. Yeah. I could be wrong, but I think it's. But in any way, he has been has he been able to move? And right now, the U.S., as you can see, not only they're not able to move on that issue, but on any other issue. We have, this is another phenomenon we have, that within societies, we see this fragmentation, and when you have the U.S. is almost stuck between the executive and the legislative branch, when on issues even like immigration, when the president is saying, I'm going to regularize the case of immigration, Congress will go out of its way, the majority, to say we'll make sure that you will not do it, or normalization of relation with Cuba. These are issues I think should be bipartisan. National security, global security should not be partisan issues, but unfortunately they continue to be. If you talk to a big segment of people around in the U.S., in Russia, they will tell you, well, we would rather keep nuclear weapon because this is our tested, means to protect ourselves. They are even talking about the missile defense shield, which in my view could even make things worse. So, it is not an easy question. It just unless you develop a large, pressure, by global citizens, who are saying we do not want to live under these circumstances, and put the pressure on the politician. If you wait for the politician to do things, a lot of the stuff is not going to happen. You need to move. You need to move on. To me, civil society is key in all these issues, and civil society has not, in fact, been active in issues of defense. They've been active in issues of environment, trade, but they usually think that defense is so complex that we cannot get involved in it. I think it's wrong because, it impacts on your own survival at the very end, and you need an active advocacy groups, to continue to say we need to move, do things differently. But in addition, I'd like to see think tanks in different schools, universities, looking into different alternatives, because you cannot just tell them give up nuclear weapon unless you also have an alternative of a reliable security system that does not depend on nuclear weapon. And I haven't seen really much work in that area, or in that field, at the different think tank or different leading universities. On the question of Egypt, I can tell you, the whole Arab Spring, of course, is, this is a region that has been going out from decades of repression, oppression, and the lesson, it's a work in progress. You will have to, we'll have to understand that democracy, as I always keep saying, is not instant coffee. You know, it is not, it takes time, because democracy is not just, it's not just that you get rid of a regime in power. You have to have the institution, the parties, the culture, you know, and that takes time. So it's work in progress, but I can tell you that the youth who had the uprising in Egypt are still committed to see that that revolution achieve its objective, which is human dignity again. It's peace, freedom, social justice, and I think it will. You know, it just, as I said, we just have to be patient. We were too optimistic to think that things will change overnight. It doesn't. You know, I keep mention in Europe, it took 300 years, you know, to move from the, you know, the eternal fight between essentially the Pope and the Emperor. You know, these are the two powers you usually had all the time fighting, you know, the religious power and the physical power. And it took them 300 years, 30 years religious war, 80 years war, you know, every type of wars, until they kill each other in the billions, to discover at the end there is no other option but to live together. You know, they also went through religious reformation, which is something we would need in the Middle East and the Muslim world. I mean, again, it has made mention that we need to develop a strong consensus on what Islam really means and what it doesn't mean. So you don't have this kind of people, everybody running around saying, I'm doing or killing in the name of Islam. I mean, that's obviously has nothing to do with any religion. You know, no religion condone or condemn or condone killing. You know, so it's but we just, as I said, we have all to put our heads together. I also can tell you, you know, any sustainable change in the Arab world has to be inclusive. I mean, you have to build inclusive societies. I mean, any solution that exclude is not sustainable. I mean, I look here at Singapore. I mean, you have 3 ethnic, you know, groups who are living in harmony or based on respect for each other. You know, they have freedom of expression, but freedom of expression, for example, does not mean go and insult or ridicule the other group. You know, and you need an inclusive. You need to develop a system that is you agree on the basic law, which is, to me, is usually constitution, certain values. You know, all right, we are, you know, Malay, we are Hindus, we are Buddhists, we are black, we are white, we speak different language, but how could we live together without killing each other? You know, and these are, again, this is the process that's going on in the Arab world right now. I think it's how do we agree, you know, despite our different perspectives, that we can in fact live together in harmony under certain basic values. And the basic values, basically, I think, is don't get into each other belief, you know, way to conduct life unless it impacts on my own life, unless it impacts on me, you know. But that's a process, as I said, you know, if you are coming from decades of authoritarianism, that discussion has not taken place, and you need that discussion until you finally, as I always say, if you look at the U.S., the people from the American Civil Liberty Union and the Tea Party people, you know, have nothing really in common, basically, but they still manage to live together and not go to fight each other because they have a system functioning. They have an independent judiciary. They have an electoral process. They have, you know, you need to develop the values by which you can, at the end, be able to live together without try to see what we have in common, basically, in any society, rather than what the kind of differences or differentiate us. You know, focus on what the common elements we have. And if you look at that, you discover that we have a lot. To start with, we're just human beings. At the end of the day, we have the same hopes, same aspiration. You know, all the rest is junk to me. You know, frankly. The third question: how could you can get? Well, I think, how could you get strong countries or major players to, you know, to change their behavior? Don't wait for them to change their behavior. You have to start at home. You know, if you build your society, if you become strong, if you become advanced in, you know, in what if you have something to add to civilization. And I think it's not really about weapon. It's about what is each country is adding to civilization, in terms of humanity, in terms of social science, natural science. That's what you can contribute. But you have to rely on itself. You have to impress the world that you have something to offer. If you continue to be on the recipient end of the line, well, it's a human nature. They will treat you as a second class. So don't wait for them. You have to look at yourself, acknowledge assess your potential, and move forward.
Well, I'm sure you all agree that we could carry on this dialogue, but we have gone past our time. I must say the most paradoxical aspect about tonight's discussion is that, as Dr. ElBaradei said, we live in a mad world of mutual assured destruction. It's insane. And normally you associate people who take an idealistic position against such insanity to be the young generation. But surprisingly, the young generation actually has given up on the nuclear weapons issue. And it's actually the older generation that is now saying, hey, don't forget that the world can still be destroyed. And this is where I think the contribution of Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, and the others, and of course especially the contribution of Mohamed ElBaradei is an extremely important one, because I think if you want to ensure, the important thing for all of us to remember is that we only have planet A, we don't have planet B. If we destroy this planet, we have nothing left behind. So that's why I'm really glad that a strong voice like Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei is fighting for a cause that many have forgotten, which I think still remains important for all of us. And now you understand why he truly deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. So please join me in thanking Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei.
Thank you once again, Dr. ElBaradei, for the wonderful keynote speech, and Professor Mahbubani for moderating this question and answer session. May we now invite Professor Tan Chor Chuan to present a memento to Dr. ElBaradei as a token of our appreciation. Next, may we also invite Yale NUS College President, Professor Pericles Lewis, to present a token of appreciation to Dr. ElBaradei.
And could we invite Mr. Uwe Morawetz on stage to join Dr. ElBaradei, Professor Tan, Professor Lewis, and Professor Mahbubani for a group photograph, please.
It's not really about medicine, but it's we have to think of this issue.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the event. Once again, we would like to express our gratitude to Dr. ElBaradei for delivering a most enlightening speech.
We hope that you will enjoy the rest of your stay in Singapore. May we invite Dr. ElBaradei to lead the way and take his departure, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you for your presence, and we bid you good night.